It is not news to anyone that the world's leading power is experiencing difficult times. The USA has been since the end of the Second World War the dominant power in the world, and its currency, the US dollar, the reserve currency. It has been the latter, the main protagonist of the prosperity experienced in this country. And it is that, thanks to extremely low interest rates, consumption and investment in this country have been detonated. There were several policies that positioned the dollar as the world reserve currency, beginning with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. Through this agreement it was agreed that the U.S. Federal Reserve, which at the time owned 2/3 of the world's gold, would be the depositary of the gold of the world. Likewise, the U.S. dollar was given convertibility into gold. Various institutions were also created that would help maintain and enhance the dollar's status as a reserve currency, such as the International Monetary Fund and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the forerunner of the World Bank. It was through the latter that the funds for the reconstruction of Europe were granted, after the signing of the Marshall Plan, flooding European countries with debt in dollars and beginning the era of the dollar as the world reserve currency. Since then, the United States of America has experienced a time of unprecedented prosperity, especially in the period from 1945 to 1973. The interstate highway system was built, the middle class grew like never before, the suburbs began their expansion, and the gross domestic product grew from $228 billion to $1.7 trillion. Few remember China's role in World War II. China had been invaded by the Japanese Empire and was one of the first countries to join the bloc against Nazi Germany and the Japanese Empire. Previously, the Japanese had conquered the Chinese region of Manchuria, and later they had expanded to the Indochina region and the Pacific Islands. After the end of the war, China, with the help of the Allies, but mainly the Soviet Union, had recovered the territories that Japan had taken from it. After this, the Chinese Communist leader, Mao Zedong, had launched a plan to take China from an agrarian economy to an industrialized communist nation like the Soviet Union. Mao would form communes of agricultural producers and demand unrealistic production quotas, leading the peasants to give up all their produce or risk being arrested or sentenced to death otherwise. This led to the greatest famine the planet has ever seen. The numbers are not precise, but it is estimated that 15 to 55 million people died due to Mao's bad policies. Due to these mismanagements by Mao, added to others that followed him, such as the so-called Cultural Revolution, where intellectuals were persecuted and killed, several pragmatic politicians assumed power in the Chinese Communist Party. Among them was a young man who had educated in the West and who had stood out early for his results. His name was Deng Xiaoping. Deng quickly began to dismantle the legacy of Mao and the Cultural Revolution, with a series of measures that became known as Baoyuanfanzeng. True to his famous phrase, "It doesn't matter if the cat is white or black, the important thing is that it catches mice," this series of measures implemented in China the capitalist practices that Deng Xiaoping had seen in the West, but with a Chinese touch, mainly maintaining control in a single party, the Communist Party. Deng focused his China modernization plan on several pillars, such as cheap labor and an exchange rate that favored exports. In addition to this, in this way, Deng hoped that foreign investment would accelerate China's growth, attracting foreign companies with low production costs. But there were several pitfalls in this. Deng Xiaoping not only hoped that foreign companies would come to invest in his country, but that in the future, China would develop its own industry. The Chinese government forced companies to sign technology transfer agreements and partner with China's own state-owned companies. In addition, China's intellectual property protection system was very weak, so any brand or technology could easily be copied without major consequences. While China was growing economically, in steps never seen before by implementing capitalist measures, on December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. After the fall of the Soviet Union, a period of chaos and deep economic crisis followed, in which the former Communist Party member and political rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, assumed power in the new Russian Republic. Yeltsin was not exactly the best prepared politician to deal with the chaos that was taking place in his country at that time. He had applied a series of shock measures that had deepened the crisis of the former Soviet nation. He had dissolved all the organisms of the socialist state, and he had privatized all the industries, which had ended up in the hands of former colleagues and friends of his who had acquired them at auction prices and mostly through loans from the state itself. This group close to the president would later be known as the oligarchs and would have great control over the government due to their immense power and control over natural resources. After Boris Yeltsin's corruption scandals, his popularity had dropped to 2% approval, Russia was facing a deepening crisis, and the president was under pressure to leave power. That was how on December 31, 1999 he resigned from power, but not before naming someone he trusted as his successor. Putin quickly earned the respect of his opponents and the trust of citizens. Putin was motivated to take a more leading role internationally and, in his own words, to restore Russia's former glory. It was so that after the protests in the Maidan Square, in Kiev, Ukraine, in which the pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych was dismissed, the Russian government decided to annex the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine, and also sent aid to the separatist rebels in the Donbass and Lugansk regions, in addition to being directly accused by the Ukrainian government of organizing said separatist movement. Also in 2015, he decided to send troops to Syria, to support and protect President Bashar al-Assad, in an open confrontation against the United States government, which was persecuting him for crimes against humanity. It was this series of political successes for Putin that motivated him to act on February 24, 2022 in Ukraine, ordering a full invasion of the country. Thus, Putin is now not only in an open confrontation with the United States of America, but with all its NATO allies and partners. The Soviet Union not only inherited a vast arsenal of weapons from Russia, but also an infinity of natural resources, on which Russia based its economy from the fall of the Soviet bloc to the present. It can be said that Russia does not have a developed economy. The high concentration of power and capital in the Russian oligarchs has caused the economy to not develop properly. Russia is one of the least friendly countries for foreign capital. Problems such as corruption cause few to risk investing in that country. However, its ace in the hole is its enormous gas reserves, being the country, not only with the largest reserves, but also the largest gas production on the planet. Europe is totally dependent on gas imports from other countries. This has led this continent to import about half of its consumption of this resource from Russia. A cut in this supply would endanger thousands of families who depend on this gas to heat their homes in winter, as well as part of the electricity production that is generated mostly with Russian gas. A journey as long as the world, is how the 13th century Venetian traveler would describe his trading journeys with his father and uncle through the ancient Silk Road. In his work, The Book of a Thousand Wonders narrates his voyages on his commercial trips to China and the Middle East, in which he imported spices and exotic products to the West. For more than 1,000 years, the Silk Road was a bridge between East and West where merchants obtained the most exotic products that were in demand in Europe, but above all a product whose manufacturing secrets the Chinese jealously guarded, the silk. More than 1,000 years later, the route lost prominence, but while Russia increased its geopolitical ambitions and outlined its plan to make Europe increasingly dependent on its natural gas, China wanted to be more than a country of cheap labor and exports. The dream of Deng Xiaoping, the father of modern China, has always been to take the Western practices of capitalism and adapt them to the Chinese model. He dreamed of a China that would replace the power of the United States and be the first power in the world as in the times of the Silk Road. But it was not until 2013, when the current president of China, Xi Jinping, the son of a former colleague of Deng Xiaoping, who was persecuted during Mao's Cultural Revolution, took power that the strategy to regain China's global prominence was defined through a new Silk Road. Thus, in September of that same year, the president presented in Kazakhstan the One Belt, One Road project, also known as the New Silk Road. This consisted of a series of land and sea trade routes, which went from China, through Central Asia and reaching Africa and Europe. This entire infrastructure plan required agreements with various countries, but also resources that would be funded through the new Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. In short, it was an almost perfect copy of the New Deal proposed by Roosevelt in the 1930s, and it came loaded with its own institutions similar to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In 2009, a person or organization called Satoshi Nakamoto published a paper on the internet about a peer-to-peer payment system called Bitcoin. This payment system worked with a cryptographic algorithm called blockchain, which recorded monetary transactions without relying on a core entity. So not even the creator had control over how many bitcoins were issued and where they went. A few years after the birth of Bitcoin, the Chinese government began to study the technology, censoring and prohibiting activities in the industry that were not led by the government, as in 2017 when it banned exchanges and later cryptocurrency mining, until in 2021 that banned all cryptocurrency transactions except for the cryptocurrency he himself had been working on and developing, the crypto yuan. After various tests, China unveiled the crypto yuan at the opening of the Beijing Winter Olympics, just days before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After several victories in the geopolitical arena against the United States, and perhaps seeing the West weakened after a long COVID pandemic, on February 24 of this year, Russia launched a full invasion of Ukraine. The goal, in his words, was to eliminate the Nazis from the Ukraine, whatever that means. The response of the West was not long in coming, however. Some considered that it was not as harsh as they expected, a series of sanctions from the USA and its European allies. We can debate the level of severity of the sanctions applied to Russia, however we can be sure of one thing, for the former KGB agent and former director of the Russian Federal Security Agency, Vladimir Putin, these were nothing new. And it is that to tell the facts, Russia was accumulating reserves for years, mainly in gold, until today reaching levels of over $600 billion, a figure equivalent to half of its gross domestic product. These reserves give Russia the ability to finance the war with Ukraine and also finance economic sanctions. Regarding Russia's departure from SWIFT, it is difficult to think that this would not have been foreseen, but, if we remember that just a few days after the presentation of the crypto yuan, it would be when Russia would start the invasion. The crypto yuan could easily replace the SWIFT payment system and further throw Russia into the economic arms of China and its new Silk Road. On the other hand, as for the Asian giant, it is difficult to think that he would not be aware of Putin's plans and their consequences, when they are such close partners. This situation may be precisely what China would like, since Europe cannot stand the sanctions applied to Russia for long. When winter approaches, this will get worse. In addition to the increase in energy prices and as a consequence of all products, they would hit heavily in Europe, which is already weak from the pandemic. This situation would put Europe in a dilemma. If it abandons the sanctions, it would be turning its back on its partner, the United States, and would represent a fracture or even dissolution of NATO. On the other hand, if it continues with them, its population would suffer the costs and, probably, the citizens of several countries will ask leaving the European Union or NATO. One way or another, China, playing behind the board, will reach out to Europe and propose the union to the Silk Road. This would represent the end of the history of the dollar as a world reserve currency, and the rise of the yuan as such. The United States would be left isolated, with a few allies in Latin America and perhaps Japan and the United Kingdom, while China would dominate the trade worldwide and will probably culminate in the invasion and annexation of Taiwan. America is in a very complicated situation, however it has alternatives that, if applied quickly, may be able to stop or postpone the decline of the dollar. One of them, and perhaps the only one, is the creation of the digital dollar or crypto dollar that we will talk about in the next video. If you want to know more about how cryptocurrencies will change capitalism as you know it, and how you can be part of that change, I invite you to take my free crypto marketing course. Just click on the link in the comments, and of course, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you can keep learning more about blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and tokenization.